trying to suggest that. So vulnerabilities that we come into the world with that are pre-wired can be, I think, importantly influenced if we have executive function. That is, if we can use our brains to deal with our out-of-control feelings. Now, Wedico is a camp in New Hampshire at which we've done a lot of research, which I won't be talking about here, except for one thing. Wedico is a camp in which kids from age 7 to 19, we worked with the ones from 7 to 13, are for problems of what's called a high externalization. Forgive that language. What it means is that they're very prone to be highly aggressive and or depressive or both. Okay? So they're already having a lot of problems on dimensions that are tough dimensions to deal with. This is the situation there. It looks like any camp except that the counselor to kid ratio is 1-on-1 practically. So there are 8 kids in the camp and maybe 5 counselors or 6 counselors to deal with the issues that are constantly coming up. Now what you're seeing here is the relationship between self-distraction when these kids, 7 to 13, were waiting for a bigger bag of M&Ms rather than just a few M&Ms that they could have right away. And this is a measure based on 189 hours of observation per child, okay, of how much verbal aggression or physical aggression they displayed over the course of a 6-week summer. And what you can see here as far as correlations within psychology go, these are not bad. Suggesting that the kids who are able to self-distract while waiting for the bigger marshmallows are the ones who are less likely to wind up giving the counselor a concussion on the head by hitting her very, very hard with a flashlight, which happens at Wedico. So it's not that they're immune from aggression problems, but there's going to be a split second of less enactment of the problem because they're able to do this self-distraction in a strategic way that's helpful. In this collaborative study with the crew of neuroscientists that I was referring to that's quite recent, we looked at the relationship between delay of gratification measured consistently over the first 30 or so years of life, beginning with the marshmallow test, and what goes on in their brains when they're in the scanner, and come back to Stanford to have their brain scanned up there, which was taking place in the last few years. The hypothesis was that exactly what it says here, that resistance to temptation varies as a function of how well we control our impulses and how sensitive we are to the appetite of a hot cue or context of stimuli. So there are 2 issues involved here. Can I inhibit the response? And how hot am I in processing the attractive stimulus? That is, how arousing is the marshmallow for me? Or how arousing, if I'm Bill Clinton, is Monica Lewinsky to me? So, or the hamburger. So think of this really as 2 different aspects of the willpower problem. How easily I can exert executive function and how arousable I am, how sensitive or oversensitive I am to those hot stimuli. The hot stimulus is the smiling face. And this is, I don't want to go into the methodology of the go, no go task and so on, but basically they're learning to do go, 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 and then no go. And we're measuring the split seconds for them to accurately go, no go when they should go, no go, okay? Low delayers tested 40 years later had difficulty suppressing responses to appetite of hot social cues. Okay? So we're not talking food here, we're talking attractive faces. In high delayers, this is B.J. Casey, my neuroscience colleague, reporting on what she says to reporters when they call her. In hinder layers, the cool system, the prefrontal cortex was more active. It's the area used for effective problem solving, creative thinking, and impulse control. In lower layers, the ventral striatum was more active, the hot system area linked to desire, pleasure, and addictions located deeper in the brain. Hinder layers had better mental brakes, whereas lower layers seem to be driven by a stronger engine. Susceptibility to temptations involve both control of impulses and sensitivity to the appetite of cue or context. Resisting temptation is supported by ventral frontal striatal circuitry shown previously to be involved in disorders of addiction and impulse control. So how can we rethink willpower, given all this? We differ in how easy self-control is, but hard or easy, I think willpower is not a broad, unchangeable trait. It depends on cognitive skills and motivation. By changing how we represent our temptations cognitively, we can use the cool system to regulate the hot system and have real choice and self-control rather than be victims of stimulus control. From irresistible temptation to poison, the gluten problem is something I want to tell you about, because the question is, how hard is cognitive appraisal so that we can get out of being under stimulus control? So allow me to tell you a short personal story, which is approximately 25 years ago, I developed a horrendous itch on my elbows. And I spent an awful year going to dermatologists trying to find out what's wrong with me, because it's a very uncomfortable condition. And finally, I wound up, this was 25 years ago, no internet for research, going to the Columbia Medical School library and reading about gluten and discovering that gluten is something that can actually be handled. It will show up in different ways, but it can be handled if you change your diet and don't eat gluten. So I went back to my dermatologist and said, how come you've had me on a medication that requires my taking blood tests every month or two, and that has dangerous side effects when you could have told me I can be on a gluten-free diet? And he said, what was the point of talking about being on a gluten-free diet in a gluten-filled world? Nobody has the willpower to do that. Well, it turns out, actually, that thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people are being diagnosed with gluten allergies, and they're having the willpower to do that. And what has changed is that for them, the things that they love, for example, and I can list them for you in exquisite detail, I'll spare it for you, are now no longer the irresistible hot fudge cake, or no longer the incredible pesto alfredo or whatever. They're poison. And that's what cognitive appraisal is about. When you realize that cigarette is poison. It's not this, when you realize it is this kind of reframing effect in vivo that is what cognitive appraisal is all about. So is it all pre-wired? Back to that question. I've just written a book which was inspired by the fact that Radiolab, when it's talking about my work, has as its tagline, your future in a marshmallow. And the motivation for the book is really to say your future is not in a marshmallow, but your future can be in a better understanding of what the mechanisms are that can allow you to resist gluten or marshmallows or Monica Lewinsky or whatever. But there's a real problem here also, which is how can you do it? Can you be easily, reasonably converted? And these are just some of the kinds of evidence of what's going on currently that I think lead me to a clear yes answer on that one. It's possible to train executive control from preschool to what is going on in some of the New York charter schools that I'm involved with. People like Michael Posner and Adele Diamond have done experiments to teach executive control early in life. You get very similar effects also, interestingly, in teaching self-control from mindfulness meditation in adults. That seems to have a lot to it also. If then implementation plans can make a huge difference, grit and resilience, persistence can be taught and are being taught. But what is absolutely crucial to understand is having executive function and being able to self-control gives you competence, but it can leave you very aimless if you're a young person. It can leave you without a purpose. For purpose, you need motivation and you need burning goals. So that, I think, the willpower story has at least two pieces to it: the cognitive skills to enable it and the motivation and burning goals to do it. And I think for me, the critical question is how do we get the discriminative facility to know when it's time to ring the bell? That is, a life in which all one is doing is cognitively reappraising so that the pleasures of life are abstracted away and lose their zest is not one I would have wished to live. So when do you ring the bell and decide it's time to eat those marshmallows or time to stop the talk? And I think it's around now. I want to leave you with one final word here, which is that when we look at our trajectories from that Bing study, from that original study, there are not two, there are four. What we've talked about, what the media have talked about, what the studies have talked about are the top one, the purple line, and the bottom one, the blue line. That is where we see the difference between the people who are relatively high in self-control and self-regulation over the life course and those who are not. But to me, perhaps the most interesting line is the green one, which is the ones who start low and then go up, and the ones who start high and then go down. So if I had another life in psychology, it would be to try to figure out what goes on in those two trajectories. The final quote I want to leave you with is a revision of Descartes. This is, after all, a talk sponsored by the philosophy department. Descartes famously said, "I think, therefore I am." What I think the self-control research tells us is I think, therefore I can change what I am. Because by changing how we think, we can change what we feel, do, and become. So that, for me, is the take-home message. And these are some of the many people who have been enormously helpful in my recent work. Thank you so much.